Donald Trump's speeches are getting weirder and weirder, darker and darker. I mean, you know, this on Saturday he called Kamala Harris, our vice president, mentally impaired. Now, you know, there's many of us who have been saying for some time that Donald Trump is mentally impaired, including, you know, 29 psychiatrists who, you know, wrote a book about it. Dr. Bandy Lee, who's been on this program a number of times, was kind of the lead author on that thing and took the most heat for it. But Kamala Harris, and then he said she was born that way. And is that like because she's born with brown skin? Yeah, I'm guessing that's what Trump meant. You know, I've said before, this is no longer a dog whistle. This is a bullhorn. This is you know, white sheets and burning crosses. That, I mean, that we're in that territory right now in the Republican Party, or in Trump's Republican Party, and in Trump's part of the Republican Party, which is most of the Republican Party. Vice President Harris went down on Friday to the U.S.-Mexico border and gave a really good speech and pointed out that there would be thousands, more border agents right now, that the speed of time, the amount of time it takes to process somebody applying for asylum would go from 6 years down to 6 months if the legislation that Jim Langford, the Republican senator from, I believe, Oklahoma, authored, maybe Wyoming, I mix those states up, but wherever Langford's from, you know, one of those western states, that if that legislation, I mean, he's a conservative Republican, right? I mean, this is pretty tough legislation. But it really would have beefed up the border, and it would have beefed up the court system, and it, you know, because the system is just badly broken. It hasn't been updated since 1986 when Reagan did it. And Langford did the hard work on this, along with, you know, he had some Democrats who were working with him. And, you know, what came out of that, the bottom line that came out of that is that, you know, Kamala Harris gave a great speech and pointed out that this legislation would have largely solved the problem that the Republicans are screaming about, which is people crossing the border. And it failed because Donald Trump called up Mike Johnson. Now, this is after this legislation passed the Senate on a bipartisan basis. Democrats and Republicans voted for it. And it would have passed the House of Representatives. It was, you know, it was a no-brainer, this piece of legislation. And Donald Trump called up Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, and said, do not allow this to come to the floor for a vote. And so Mike Johnson's been sitting on it. And the only reason, literally the only reason Donald Trump did not want this piece of legislation to have a vote is because it would have solved the problem at the border, and he would no longer have anything to run on. But he's running around talking about how now well, here, this is, Joe Biden became mentally impaired. Kamala was born that way. She was born that way. And if you think about it, only a mentally disabled person could have allowed this to happen in our country. I mean, this is sick rhetoric. When Harris was asked about this at a fundraiser on Saturday, she said, it's just the same old tired playbook we've heard for years. And she's right. But we haven't ever heard this kind of rhetoric, at least rhetoric this explicit, from a Republican running for president of the United States. This is something new. And he spoke in Wisconsin, flanked on stage by large mugshots of migrants accused of crimes. He painted this hellscape picture of America. By the way, the same month that the FBI came out just a couple of weeks ago and said the new crime statistics are out, and murder is down. You know, crime is down, way below where it was when Trump was president. Murder is way below where it was when Trump was president. Immigrants are far less likely to commit crimes than our U.S. citizens. And, I mean, that just makes sense. I mean, people come to this country not to commit crimes. They can commit crimes at home. They come to this country looking for opportunity. And if they're here illegally, they're still looking for opportunity. And you know, I get it. There are a few criminals who will get through, but they're very much the minority. And like I said, you're far more likely to be convicted of a crime or arrested for a crime or even to commit a crime if you're a natural-born American, if you're an actual American. So Trump is just ignoring reality here, of course. Nothing new about that. And then you look at the people that he's surrounding himself with. I mean, you know, he's got like John McEntee, the guy who led the screening for political appointees for Trump and for Project 2025. Who's John McEntee? He basically has no qualifications. He was loyal to Trump. So Trump put him in charge of the Office of Personnel in the White House. He had no background in this area. In fact, he failed a security check because he has a gambling addiction. No qualifications. And this guy then got a bunch of money from a right-wing billionaire to launch a dating app. It's called The Right Stuff. It's a dating app for conservatives. And this is from Wired magazine. One 18-year-old on the app, a young woman, was messaged by McEntee, who's 34 years old. She described her experience to Wired, quote, "It was very sexual from day one. He kept making comments about my age and how hot it would be to sleep with someone who is my age. He would say things like, I come and visit and we hook up or whatever. You should bring one of your friends or you should take a couple of your friends." And it was like verifying that my friends were the same age as me as well, end quote. So there's that guy. And then there's Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, who now, you know, we talked about this last week. Now it comes out that he beat his neighbor's dog to death with a shovel because the dog was barking. And the neighbor didn't even realize this. I mean, this happened like 4 or 5 years ago. And the neighbor just thought his dog vanished. Apparently, Kevin Roberts not only beat the dog to death because he was bragging. I mean, we know he did that because he himself was bragging about it. But he apparently disposed of the body. And these are the kinds of people that are that Donald Trump is surrounding himself with. Meanwhile, the Republicans are eroding democracy it's a mistake, one error at a time. That's the headlines by Tiffany Torres Williams over at Project 2025 takedown.substack.com. You know, I've mentioned there's a couple of really good Project 2025 Substacks out there. This is one of them. Secretary of State Christy Jacobson is the head of, who oversees voting in Montana. She's the Montana Secretary of State. And in July, she illegally dumped tens of thousands of signatures off a ballot initiative to protect the right to abortion in Montana. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention, and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Velma Espen. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question. What is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espen. In Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, health care, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital experience.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday and it's Thanksgiving week. You know, I hope it's a good week for you and your family. I suspect it will be for us and ours. I'm looking forward to it. A lot coming up. A lot going on in some ways. I mean, you know, Trump has his cabinet all picked out, but there's still, and really, I think from now until just after probably the 20th of January, there's not going to be an enormous amount of big stuff going on, but you know, we'll see. There's still a lot going on. Kamala Harris is reportedly thinking about a second attempt at taking the White House or running for governor of California. She and her family are in Hawaii trying to figure this stuff out. And a third woman in Texas has died from their abortion ban. Her husband called his mother, a former physician, when his wife was in the hospital bleeding to death, and they were refusing to do anything about it because they were afraid of going to jail. She had a miscarriage, and it had not completely cleared her uterus, and they were afraid to do a D&C. And she died 3 hours after he called his mother. And his mother, the doctor, said, your wife needs a D&C. So a lot to talk about today. We can't all be good Germans or good Russians and now good Americans. We'll get to that in just a moment. Also, the next pandemic could be brewing. Is Trump's team ready to fail us again? In the second hour of our program, straight white people can chill out. They're still in charge. And what this tells us about the media, particularly the right-wing media. And the Trump administration confirms they're going to slash funding to states that don't behave or cooperate with their plan for mass deportation. You think that's going to work? Our third of the program, Congressman Ro Khanna is going to drop by for the full hour to take your calls. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and, of course, represents California's 17th district, so in the U.S. House. So a lot to talk about today. The survivors of Viktor Orban's, what would you call it, autocracy, are speaking out, essentially. This is a former Hungarian member of parliament, excuse me. His name is Gabor Schering, and he notes, he wrote an essay for Politico, and he says there are numerous similarities between Orban and Trump. You know, both are former presidents who lost elections and then returned to power, and then both are strident culture warriors. And he says Orban deployed both the hardware and the software of autocracy or authoritarianism or oligarchy. The software is Orban portraying himself, even though arguably he was a member of the intellectual elite. George Soros paid for him to go to college in England. But he portrays himself as a folksy outsider who is a populist hero of the working class. And Trump has done the same. They also share an intense anti-immigrant platform. Orban has said that immigrants are polluting the blood of Hungarians. Trump says they're poisoning the blood of Americans. You know, just pure, unadulterated racism. And Orban and Trump, they are demonizing immigrants as a way, he says, of dividing and conquering the working class. And this has certainly worked well for Trump. Another crucial piece of that software is something he calls economic nationalism that combines grievance politics with the very real frustration that people have had after 40 years of neoliberalism has chipped away at the middle class in Hungary as well as the United States. Schering, the former Hungarian member of parliament, says, right-wing populists glorify makers over takers, which he said resonates with working-class voters who value hard work. So even the plutocrats in Hungary, just like the billionaires, I mean, Trump now has 5 billionaires and 2 people worth $900 million in his cabinet, or as his advisors. I mean, if you're including Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. He says they're all, in Hungary, these billionaires, they're all portrayed as hardworking value creators as opposed to lazy bureaucrats or benefit scroungers. He said now that's all the software of autocracy. He said the hardware of the far-right authoritarian state that Viktor Orban has built in Hungary is fourfold. Number one, strengthening executive power. Orban, since he was reelected in 2010, after being out of power for a couple of years, he immediately began consolidating all of the power of the state within the office of the prime minister. And this is what Trump has declared he's going to do starting on January 20th. Orban has gotten the judiciary under his control. He has appointed enough authoritarian, right-wing, hard-right, billionaire-loving, fluffing judges that he basically controls. He has started an American-style voter registration system. You can get purged from the voting. I mean, he's basically taking control of the election process. And he's also controlled the media. He has changed the libel laws so that he could sue individual writers and newspapers and magazines and and television stations and radio stations, and then did so, ran them into bankruptcy, had his billionaire buddies buy them out, and now all of the media, for all practical purposes, certainly all of the mainstream media in Hungary, praises Viktor Orban 24/7. It's like Fox News is the only thing that exists in Hungary. And these are all the things that Donald Trump has literally talked about doing. So what do we do about this? Well, his advice, Schering's advice to Americans is fight back at the state and local level, wage war in the media, and don't back down. Do absolutely everything you can with every tool you have. Meanwhile, Russian dissidents are also warning us. Miriam Elder is a veteran journalist who reported from Russia for nearly a decade. She wrote a piece for the New York Times over the weekend describing how when Vladimir Putin fully returned to the presidency, keep in mind, Orban came in 2010, Putin came in 2012, after having Dmitry Medvedev fill in for him for 4 years. So Putin is back. And when he came back in, just like Orban, and frankly, I think just like Trump is going to do, the first thing he did was crack down on dissent. Started putting protesters, in jail and going after journalists. So what happened then in 2012 was that it wasn't all that bad yet. And so basically, most of the left-wing press, most of the people who would protest Putin, basically just said, "Okay, that's it. I'm going to retire. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to go, go to work at McDonald's or something. Enough of this, showing up in the street stuff." And that complacency basically gave Putin what he refers to as a free hand to launch further repression internally, but then also in 2022 to go out and attack Ukraine. And he said, we became insular. We lost sight of everyone else's interests. He says it was the start of the time where we are right now with the war in Ukraine, with a completely destroyed civil society. What I didn't understand then was that it was just the beginning. Which reminds me of that professor that Milton Mayer interviewed for his book, They Thought They Were Free, where, this professor says, we really couldn't imagine where it would end up. I mean, you spoke out, but the people said you were an alarmist. It seemed like there was something to be concerned about, but was there? We just didn't know. We had no idea where this was going to go. We had never seen anything like it before. Well, you know, the Hungarians and the Russians had both seen the example of Germany. I mean, they'd seen it up close and personal. Germany had invaded both countries and seized Hungary. And yet, the dissidents in Germany and Hungary allowed Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin to crush the opposition, seize control of the media, solidify their control over the nation, and that was the end of that. So, you know, what do we do? Reasonable question. I'm not sure that anybody has an answer for that. So, anyhow, 16 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day, and you're back, specifically your calls right after the break. What's on your mind? Do you think Kamala Harris should run for president again? Do you think that I'm assuming we'll have an open primary for the 2028 election? I don't see how it could be otherwise. Or should she run for governor of California? You know, why isn't she out there kicking Trump's ass right now in the media? What's going on?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll be right back, 16 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. And welcome back, Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan, you're live and on the air. What's on your mind today?
Wow. Well, back to your question, I don't know what to do. I've just had a horrifying experience this weekend. I cut my cable, so I'm doing totally the most free streaming and my over-the-air TV. Mm-hmm. And I am just appalled at how many options I'm getting on the streaming to watch OAN and Newsmax in the War Room. And that was bad enough. But on my over-the-air TV here in my corner of Idaho, OAN and the War Room on another channel. These people have nothing to balance what they're getting out. Yeah. Obviously, the newspapers are dying. The online news outlets are those pink slime journalism for the most part, unless you know what you're looking for and get, you know, the actual real news journalists. And I have no idea how to counteract this. Do you?
I don't. I think this is one of those things where the Democrats have dropped the ball big time, and large Democratic donors have dropped the ball, and nobody's been paying serious or careful attention to building a media infrastructure on the left. And as a result, right-wing billionaires have come in and built a massive media structure on the right. I'm amazed. You've got a local television station in Idaho that's carrying Steve Bannon?
Yes, I nearly fell off my couch last night.
Wow.
And this is, mind you, yes, this is this is over-the-air TV. Yes, I can get my local CBS or NBC outlet, for the evening news. But they don't talk about the same things that Mr. Bannon is talking about. Right. Really, it's local news. I just appalled. Before I did this, with my change in my viewing habits, I figured, we can handle this. Now I'm totally just flummoxed.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I could possibly go against this. This is all the things that are free. And then the majority of the free news outlets are all Fox things.
Yeah.
On the streaming service that I have, and it's free because I'm retired and I don't like to spend all that money now, it outnumbers, the what you would call the networks, ABC, NBC, by like 2 to 1.
Yeah.
Just to see what's local news, here, there, and everywhere. It's amazing, and it's really frightening, and I'm agree with you. They have really dropped the ball. They're not seeing what's there, and I don't think they have any way of getting their message, at least in my state.
Conservatives have known this since the 50s. I mean, William F. Buckley was the thought leader in this regard, that and Lewis Powell as well, that conservatives needed to build think tanks, they needed to build an intellectual infrastructure, and then out of that they needed to build a media infrastructure to communicate those ideas. I mean, it used to be just the occasional right-wing op-ed, that got syndicated into your local newspaper. and then it grew into right-wing publications, National Review, William F. Buckley's publication, and others. And now, you've got Sinclair Broadcasting with, over 200 television stations across the country. You've got 1,500 right-wing radio stations. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's crazy. Democrats really need to get their act together. This is what's poisoning the blood of America. Susan, thank you for the call. That's pretty amazing. Thank you. Sad, but amazing. 21 minutes past the hour. I'll be back here in 60 seconds. We'll keep picking up your calls. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back in 1968, when Lyndon Johnson was president, Earl Warren resigned from the Supreme Court. He was a liberal, even though he had been appointed by Eisenhower. Johnson wasn't able to replace him, in part because of Republican opposition in the Senate. And so when Nixon came in, he had this opening, but he wanted to have two openings. He wanted to get rid of Abe Fortas, who was the most liberal member of the court. So he had his Attorney General, John Mitchell, start an investigation into Abe Fortas's wife. Now, there was nothing there. There was no smoke at all. She had done absolutely nothing wrong, and history has proven that. But they were going to drag her before a grand jury and possibly before Congress and just, drag her through the mud. And this caused Abe Fortas to resign, and that gave Nixon two openings, and that's how the court turned to the right. I'm suggesting that Democrats should do the same thing with Justice Thomas. I've got an op-ed about it at Hartmann Report. You can read it over there. Check it out.
On the air, a virus mutates, the world's unprepared. The lessons of the past are clear, but poor leadership brings us fear. Bird flu spreads, the stakes are high, lives are at risk beneath the sky. Science fades where chaos reigns, and history's weight returns again. Trump, bird flu, and the new pandemic threat. The cost of failure we can't forget. Leadership matters when crises appear. The choices we make will shape the years.
The next pandemic could be brewing. Is Trump team's ready to fail us again? That's the title of my op-ed here over at HartmannReport.com. Arguably the most important aspect of leadership is the ability to deal with a crisis, right? And there could be a big crisis coming. The massive incompetence and actual malice of the Trump administration that we saw back in 2020, where in March of 2020, it was reported that mostly black people were dying from COVID, and that was the point at which Trump decided to end the lockdowns, end the shutdown, push people back to work based on the belief that mostly it would kill black people. And then because the virus first really appeared in a big way in Washington state, you'll recall the first cases were in Seattle, and then in Connecticut and New York and New Jersey, people coming in from Europe, flying into the East Coast. Those were all blue states run by blue state governors, and so Jared Kushner and his buddies advised Donald Trump, this could be an effective political strategy to just blame this on the Democratic governors. And so we had incompetence and outright malice. Well, here's what's going on now. There's a teenager in Canada. They have no idea how this girl got infected, but she's on death's door. She's in a critical condition, or at least was 4 or 5 days ago when this article was published by Nature, the Science Journal. And they note, I'll quote from the Nature article, viral genome sequences released last week suggest that the teenager is infected with an H5N1 avian influenza virus bearing mutations that might improve its ability to infect the human airway. If true, that means that the virus can rapidly evolve to make the jump from birds to humans. Researchers have homed in on 3 key differences between the normal bird flu virus and the teenagers. 2 possible mutations that could enhance the virus's ability to infect human cells, and another that could allow it to replicate more easily in human cells, not just in the cells of its usual avian hosts. So here we have, I mean, it was the bird flu that killed 700,000 Americans in the pandemic of 1918 through 1920. And that was when we had a population of only 100 million. That would be the equivalent of about 2.1 million people dying from flu this time around, if it's the same as, if it's as deadly as it was then. There's no certainty around this, whether it'll be deadly, whether it'll be deadlier, or whether it'll be less deadly. But they just, the way that this flu virus mutates is typically in either humans or pigs. Pigs get the human flu viruses just like we do. And they think that's what happened in 1918, although it's still being debated. But here we've got, and here in Oregon, we had 5 pigs that were infected with the flu virus. The feds came in and euthanized them. Now, the good news is, and this is why we shouldn't panic about this, the good news is we know how to make flu vaccines. We've been doing it since 1945. We had no idea how to make a COVID vaccine when the COVID pandemic started, the coronavirus vaccine. We'd never made one before. But we've got flu vaccines. And so, although we don't have a vaccine for this particular flu because, it hasn't finished mutating yet, but that'll come. But there is some evidence that if you have a regular flu vaccine right now, it will give you some help in the event you get infected with the bird flu when it comes. But bottom line, heads up, let's not panic. But I am concerned about the fact that Bob Kennedy and this Markey guy, who are both vaccine skeptics and both believe in herd immunity, if reports are true, will be running our government if and when this happens. You can check it out over at HartmannReport.com. I'll be back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
27 minutes past the hour. Your call's up next. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they would be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war. How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred. How to win it if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
Lie before us, the shadows grow so near, a path of light and liberty, or one ruled by fear. With banners raised in anger, the tyrants call their band, but the people hold the power, it's democracy's last stand. Will we rise or will we fall?
Welcome back, 34 minutes past the hour. And what's the pandemic going to be like with vaccine deniers and mask haters and people who call lockdowns tyranny, government tyranny? We went through this in 1918, actually. You can Google it. There's here in Oregon, there was a guy who actually went to jail for refusing to wear a mask. And that produced this enormous right-wing backlash, and they got him out of jail, and he became a local hero. And I mean, it's like history repeats itself, right? How bad could it get with Kennedy and Markey or Mark Macri or whatever his name is in charge? The guy that Trump wants in charge of the FDA. This guy that Trump wants in charge of the FDA is he actually wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, just coming right out and saying that this was in February of 2021, right? We just really had the vaccines for about a month and a half. And he said, by April we'll have herd immunity. And he wasn't talking about because of the vaccines. He was talking about because, enough people will have been infected. To achieve herd immunity with COVID, the scientists estimate requires about 80% of all Americans getting infected, which would mean about 3 to 4 million fatalities, 30 or 40 million, cases of long COVID, permanent disability. But you do that because you don't need vaccines, really. I mean, this is the guy that Trump wants to put in charge of the Food and Drug Administration that oversees vaccines. I'm concerned. I think we all should be concerned. Susan in Flagstaff, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today? Susan? I'm not hearing you. I'm going to put Susan on hold. She's on line 2, Mateo. You can check it out there. Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane. Can you hear me?
Hello, Tom.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
I can. What's up?
All right. You're pretty up on things. Have you heard that the connection between avian flu showing up in the dairy industry, I mean, that's kind of odd, isn't it? The reason is that they are being so cruel as to feed these cows the bedding that the chickens have sat in straw, probably.
That's correct. They're feeding them chicken feathers.
That sat on and pooped on and everything, and they're feeding that to the cows, and that's where the cows are picking up the avian flu.
Yep, that's true. That's true. And chickens only have a digestive system that's about 30% efficient. And so in the bulk chicken growing operations, they stack chicken cages 3 high. They feed the top cage. The top cage poops down to the second cage. The second cage eats the poop from the first cage. They poop down to the third cage. The third cage eats the poop from the second cage. And by that time, the poop has, all of its nutritional value is largely gone. And then they take that and they feed it to cows. And you're absolutely right.
And you figure the bedding, it's like serving us for salad instead of lettuce or romaine spinach or whatever. They feed us newspaper shredded up. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what we're making those poor animals eat. And then they feed them. It's the most despicable industry. If you watched an industrial farm video, you'd be done for milk, dairy, meat, all of that.
Yeah.
I've gotten myself down to the point where I eat meat rarely, cheese maybe on pizza, that sort of thing. But other than that, I've just completely gotten away from it, and I just feel at least I can look an animal in the eyes and feel, decent about it, like I'm a cohabitant of the earth. I don't want to get preachy about it. I just think that we got to rethink what we're doing to animals, because I just can't believe that they were designed to be treated the way they were. Yeah, I mean, if you got any respect for life, yes. And you can watch these short videos of cows that they've saved from the meat industry and whatever, and they're like puppy dogs. I mean, these animals are very loving. Pigs, chickens, even chickens, goats, all of that. They really remember people who saved them. Yeah. It's incredible to watch. And then you hear about this despicable treatment of animals. It is so inhumane. It's hard to call yourself a human.
Yeah. Louise used to spend the weekends when she was a little kid on her grandmother's farm, and they had farm animals, and she and her brother would name the cows, which just infuriated her grandfather and grandmother. And I remember when our son was a teenager, and we were concerned he was going to get in serious trouble because he and his friends, they had started this vegan group, and they were going around to the supermarkets sticking stickers on packages of meat that said, you know, this was once a baby pig, this was once a baby cow.
Good for them.
And we were kind of ambivalent about it at the time. I mean, he's in his late 40s now. He's been a vegan, a hardcore vegan, basically his entire life. We raised him as a vegetarian, and he's big, muscular guy. You know, I mean, you know, just all this you got to eat meat stuff is just complete nonsense.
When I'm in a grocery store, I'll say to someone, "Isn't it amazing how humans haven't weaned themselves in adulthood?"
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, there you go.
Wean yourself.
There you go.
They go.
Yeah.
I said, bulls can
Stop
be
the
huge
dairy
and big,
products.
and they eat grass their whole life, and they're built up and big. Now, what's the problem here? They got big, strong bones. They didn't drink, you know, wean.
Yeah, you know,
it's just amazing when you think of us.
You know, there's this whole movement of vegan bodybuilders and weightlifters, and Arnold Schwarzenegger narrated a video about them. I think it's called "This Changes Everything." You can find it over on YouTube.
Olympians.
It's about
Olympian athletes.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of Olympian athletes who are vegans.
vegans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, there you go. Diane, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Spot on. Susan in Flagstaff, Arizona. You want to try it again, Susan?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, what's up?
You hear me?
I do.
Yeah, in fact, I just woke up and thought Kamala's got to run again, and she motivated us so much that we were shocked when she lost.
Except
and
that several million of us didn't show up to vote compared to just 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's the part of us, because not only should she start. I'm not saying campaign, but she should start criticizing the whole Republican Party, not just Trump.
I agree.
And what they're doing.
I agree.
And
I've been asking myself now for several weeks, where is she? You know, apparently she's in Hawaii with her family, but I mean, why is she not, you know, at least walking out to the front of the house every day for 15 minutes and talking to the press about the latest outrage from Trump? You know, Trump would be doing that if he had lost.
Right. I think that she could make a huge difference. And when you address the idea of why didn't all these Democrats vote, we Democrats, stop waiting. I know there's reorganization time for new officers in each LD, but we should start canvassing and calling right now.
Yeah, I'm with
and
you.
not just her. That way, because I'm Susan from Phoenix, by the way. I've been having a hard time getting through
Phoenix.
to you
Okay.
in the last few weeks. Yeah, but I also live in Flagstaff. I live in both places.
Okay.
So, anyway, she. The organization, it takes, they're reorganizing, and I don't think they should delay because of that, but I do think it would make a big difference if we
organization,
started
you mean
canvassing.
the DNC?
Well, not just the DNC, but at the local levels, the LDs. We should be calling the vote. I was going to tell you, in Phoenix, we are in the largest blue district in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And we have something like 80,000 Democrats. Mm-hmm. And we have, our email list is less than 3,000. And we've got to reach out to these other Democrats. Yes,
I'm with you. Yeah, well, I mean, you can buy a list of people who are registered as Democrats in your state and just, start reaching out to them. It'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, well,
the problem is so many of these Democratic parties are so underfunded.
Yeah, that's true, but we do have, and here's the scary part. In our state, they had, I guess the windows of the Tempe office was shot out.
Yeah, several times.
You can't even get the office address from the Arizona State or the Maricopa County. They won't post it because they're, afraid.
Wow, amazing.
I know.
Susan, thank you for the call. I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's 44 and a half minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're right here. I'll be right back with more of your calls. Welcome back. Susie in Willits, California. Hey, Susie, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've just been hearing a lot about these background checks, for the Senate.
Mm-hmm. You mean for the cabinet members?
Yes, the cabinet members. Thank you. It's like I've been a teacher, and I've had to go through so many background checks. And you know what? A lot of the parents are having to go through background checks, too, to see who's going to pick up whom.
Yeah, but Trump doesn't want to do that.
He's
refusing to sign the documents that would, on the one hand, allow the FBI to do the background checks, and on the other hand, would also require Trump to disclose who's giving him money for his transition. So right now, for all we know, Saudi Arabia just gave Donald Trump $1 billion, or Russia did, for that matter. We have no idea.
But I mean, they're really like, I don't know. The show on Sunday morning, they're saying, they're going to do all this and that, and then no background checks.
Yeah.
On anybody.
It's not a good thing, Susie.
I mean,
You're
it's
absolutely
unbelievable.
right.
They do that on parents.
I know. I get it. No, you're absolutely right, Susie. Thank you for the call. Jan in Denver. Hey, Jan, what's up?
Hi, that's a really good segue into my issue. The more I find out about Hegseth, H-E-G-S-E-T-H, the appointment to head the military, they're talking about his tattoos and the alleged rape allegation.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard any of the mainstream media talk about some of his books. One of them, written in 2020, is American Crusade, where he talks about the American military rounding up the rot in the left.
Yep.
And you can read the first 30 pages.
He calls for civil war
of his book online.
using those words.
Pardon?
He calls for civil war using those words.
Right.
I mean,
right.
It's
and
wild.
That should be front and center in the media.
And
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah. Well, actually, I shouldn't say he calls for civil war. It may be that he was predicting civil war, but it's perhaps a difference without a distinction without a difference. But yeah, that, and he's got Crusader tattoos on his on his body, including Dies Vult, which is the Latin phrase "God wills it," that was the rallying cry of the First Crusade in the 1300s. He's pretty open about his white Christian nationalism. And
yes, you can read the first 30 pages of his book online, and he talks about a civil war being a good thing to cleanse the country.
Which book is that?
It's American Crusade.
American Crusade. And you can read the first 30 pages, I'm assuming you mean on Amazon with the preview thing?
No, you just Google his book and you can read free the first 30 pages of his book. That's his mode to sell it, I guess.
Yeah. Remarkable.
It's horrifying.
Well, Jan, we're in for some very, very interesting times here starting in January. And
to say the least.
One of the articles on Drudge right now is about how the right-wing militia groups all around the country are eagerly anticipating this. They want to jump into the fray when the roundups of the quote illegals begins.
And then are we next? Trump's closing bases.
Oh well, we're the enemy within. Jan, thank you for the call. It's 48 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out.
It's a tale as old as time. The rich get their fill while the hard times roll and folks paying the bill. They'll tell you it's tightening belts or living lean, but in boardrooms and mansions it's cash that's king. Oh, they play that game while we take the fall. When the market's crashing, they're having a ball. They'll make a fortune when the stocks run dry. For them it's buy low, for us it's goodbye.
Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Picking up your calls here. Alvin in Little Neck, Alaska. Hey, Alvin, what's up? Little Rock. No, wait a minute. This is Little Rock, Arkansas, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's AR, not AK.
It's
Okay.
a great day to be alive.
Yeah, thank you. What's up, Alvin?
Look, I just came through Russellville. I'm about 50 miles from Little Rock now. I'm an OTR driver. The thing is that when you asked that question when I first turned your show on today, is that should Kamala run? Absolutely, she should run. However, I think because of what was necessary for her to go through what she had to go through these past 2 or 3 months, she's going to have to. She's doing the right thing, just taking off. Now, as far as her giving updates, that's our job. Is to speak those truths as decent human beings, because we know the madness that's been taught. We have a big responsibility for the next 3 to 4 years. Is to make being a decent person normal. What they're doing, what they did, they made a culture of honoring being underhanded, being nasty, being that type of person. Yeah. They've made a culture of it. Yes, and a rapist. And these women, I try to, subtly, you got to plant seeds. You can't try to throw the whole tree up on them. And when I say things, I tell women, I say, okay, what they said about her, the nasty things that he's done, and the thing, if these and the women and the men, especially that agree with them, if you see, being an African American male, if you see the culture, the disrespectful culture towards women that we've experienced, that has grown over the past 15, 20 years, then you would understand that they've already laid the groundwork. Evil has already laid the groundwork. And what we got to do is we got to bring it back to being a decent human being. And if they say that about her, then what do they think about you? That's what I try to explain to a lot of the females I know.
I get it, Alvin. So here's my question. Where is the leadership in the Democratic Party right now? Who is the person who should be on television every day raising hell about what Trump's up to?
Mr. Hartman, you got so many people that I have no idea.
See, I think right now it should be Kamala Harris. Laid the ground. Especially if she wants to run for president.
She's the best one.
Yeah, I'd like to see her out there.
Yes, sir. After she gets some rest, yes, sir.
Okay.
Because they have laid the groundwork against everybody.
Yeah.
From Al Sharpton to, you know how many years they've been cutting down and calling Hillary Clinton before she ever even thought about running for office.
Oh, yeah.
How many years beforehand they were cutting her down and calling her a crook and everything? This is the groundwork that they laid. Those are the seeds that they've laid on every one of them. They just didn't have the time to lay those seeds on Miss Harris.
Yeah.
That's the reason why, like I say, we've got to do that. That's our job as human beings.
I'm with you, Alvin.
Just guys like me.
There you go. Alvin, thank you. Well said. Thank you so much. Andy in Minneapolis. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I have a theory why Kamala Harris isn't showing herself right now. And I think that, maybe they might be investigating Trump and Musk, for voter fraud. And I think, this is the time, to quell this thing is right
the
now.
Administration doing that. Well, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, why can't they investigate him and also speak out against him? What am I missing?
Well, maybe they don't want to rock the boat right now,
Hey, the boat is sinking. It needs to be rocked.
Yeah, I know it does, but like Biden when he welcomed him to the White House and everything, it just seemed all too nice to me. Something might be going on.
Yeah, I get it.
That we don't know about. So.
Well, or Biden is just being a decent man and doing what presidents traditionally do. I mean, you don't allow evil to turn you into evil, and
well, that's true
in that regard.
But I think that I think the time to quell this thing is within this next 60 days or whatever it is, because if you let this metastasize, it's going to be even harder. So
yeah,
I mean,
and it's in the process of doing that right now. I'm with you, Andy. Thank you. Well said. Tyler in Long Beach, California. Hey, Tyler. Thanks for listening to KPSK. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the program. It's a great program today. I was just going to say that I think the right's got everything they've always wanted since I was a kid, cruising around with my conservative parents in the car. They'd be listening to Bob Grant on the radio, and he'd be screaming, and they'd be screaming, and they were always filled with anger about how inefficient the government was. And at the same time, we'd go to P-Town and the Cape and for vacation, and we'd watch, the parades at night with the punks and the queers, and they were okay with that. So, it's interesting. I think it was like an economic thing for them. I think for other people, it's more of a social thing.
This is the great trick. The billionaires have got average people like your parents all concerned about government inefficiency because it's, billionaires don't want to pay taxes, right? The government inefficiency rant started with Reagan. I mean, Barry Goldwater had it, but nobody paid attention. And they've been rooting out inefficiency. Every single Republican president, there should be no inefficiency. I mean, they've privatized a big chunk of the federal workforce. All the people who work in the Smithsonian buildings and all that stuff, they're all private contractors, and they're all making minimum wage or just a little over minimum wage. Tyler, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Today is Midnight in Chernobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m. Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station,
Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logachev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logachev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 roentgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 roentgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logachev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 roentgens an hour, an impossible number. Logachev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. White people are freaking out, right? I mean, this is what we saw in this last election, the polling and everything. Basically, white people convinced, that Donald Trump, Steve Bannon are right, that, there's an international plot funded by Jewish people to replace white people with black people and brown people and replace Christianity with Islam and blah-de-blah-de-blah-de, and cut off your kids' genitals at school, etc. I mean, it's just a bunch of wacky BS. But all that said, let's look at the actual numbers. This was an amazing study that was done by YouGov, the polling company, YOUGOV. It's, for example, they asked people, what percentage of Americans have a household income of over $1 million? It's less than 1%. It's basically 0%. It's 0.0 something percent. But Americans think 20% of us have an income of over $1 million. What percentage of Americans are transgender? That's 1%. There's roughly 15,000 transgender people in the military, for example, that Donald Trump wants to fire starting, in January. What's the estimated proportion? How many people, what do people think 21% of us are transgender. Really? Excuse me. Like Nancy Mace is, pardon me, fighting against, some massive onslaught of trans people. No. What percentage of us have a household income of over $500,000 a year? It's actually 1%. Americans estimate it's 26%. What percentage of us are Muslims? Americans think it's 27% of us. No, it's 1% of us. Native Americans, they think it's 27% of us. It's 1% of us. Jewish, they think it's 30% of us. It's 2% of us. It just goes on. What percentage of Americans do they think are members of a union? Americans think 36% of us are members of a union. That was about what it was when Reagan came into office, but actually right now it's around 4%. What percentage of us are black? The actual number is 12%. And when you ask white people, they say it's 41%. No. Hispanic, it's 17%. People think it's 39%. 32% of us own guns. Average Americans think it's 54% of us. I mean, it just goes on from there. It's like this. There was a fascinating study that was published a week or so ago. I talked about it on the program, that pointed out that the people who had the lowest amount of information, in other words, the people who really didn't know what was going on in the world, who didn't follow the news, were by a large percentage the ones that were most likely to vote for Donald Trump. And the people who did follow the news, who did pay attention to what was going on in the country, were the ones who were most likely to vote for Kamala Harris. And we've been seeing this war on reality go on ever since the Reagan era. right? Reagan's excuse to drop the top tax rate from 74%, which was working just fine, by the way. We were paying down the national debt. We were reducing our debt. We had balanced budgets, you know, not always, but mostly all the way back to the end of the Great Depression, or certainly to the end of World War II. And, you know, things were going well. And then Reagan started this lie that if we just cut taxes on rich people, everybody else would get wealthier. Well, the truth is the exact opposite. When we cut taxes on rich people got massively wealthier. In fact, billionaire wealth in the United States just in the last couple of years, just since the pandemic, has almost doubled. It's gone from around $3.5 to around $7 trillion. And the wealth of average working Americans has been declining, or flatlined, basically since the 80s, since Reagan declared war on working class people. I mean, the CEO pay has gone up hundreds of percent, 7, 8, 900%, depending on whose numbers you're using, since the 80s. Average worker pay, maybe 14%, as I recall. Depends on the industry. And, you know, we're talking inflation adjusted here. So we've been living in this information kind of vacuum, or actually not even a vacuum. It's just, we've been being gaslit by Republicans and so-called conservatives ever since the 80s in a really big way. I mean, Republicans are still claiming that if you cut taxes, it increases prosperity. Yet every single time a Republican president cuts taxes, what do we get immediately thereafter? A recession. And now Trump wants to cut government spending. He says he's going after fraud and waste, right? Well, Trump, 4 years ago, said he had taken care of fraud and waste. And George W. Bush, before that, said he had taken care of fraud and waste. And George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan before that, oh yeah, we got rid of all the fraud and waste. Basically, that was code for let's fire federal employees who have civil service protections and get good pay and have a decent retirement and are members of a union, and replace them with non-unionized, hourly paid at crap wages with no benefits employees from subcontractors. And then the subcontractors are able to skim 10 or 20% off the top and use some of that money as campaign contributions for Republicans. Because 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that bribing politicians is perfectly legal. Welcome to oligarchy in America. Remember the old quote from Louis Brandeis, the Supreme Court justice? He said, you can have great wealth or you can have democracy. Americans must make a choice. You can't have both. And here we are. We have great wealth. And our democracy is shrinking. And it's shrinking in large part because people are believing stuff that just isn't true. Joe Rogan, on his podcast this week, or apparently last week, last week, he basically said to Joe Biden, you people are about to start World War III. He's all upset because Biden told Zelensky he could use American weapons inside Russia to stop the supply trains and the bombs that are coming toward Biden. He said, he pointed his finger at Biden and said, maybe that would be a good thing we would like to avoid from a dying former president. Right. So Vladimir Klitschko, who is the Ukrainian former world heavyweight champion, and whose brother is the mayor of Kyiv, went to X and posted this. He said, Joe Rogan, I listened to your latest podcast. I'm sending you this video to let you know that I disagree. You talk about these American weapons being sent to Ukraine, which you believe will lead to the Third World War. So let me tell you, you're repeating Russian propaganda. Putin's Russia is in trouble. So they want to scare you and people like you. His war was supposed to last 3 years. It has lasted 3 days, excuse me. It has lasted 3 years thanks to the heroism and sacrifice of us Ukrainians. Putin's Russia wants to destroy Ukraine quietly. They want America to stay quiet. That's not great. A great America is not an America that abandons countries that defend freedom with their lives. So the Joe Rogan podcast says, does this make any sense to anyone or just an attempt to get on the podcast? Yeah, right. The level of misinformation and disinformation, and the number of things that people believe that are just simply not true is just truly amazing. In the meantime, the new incoming border czar, Thom Hartmann, says that if your state doesn't cooperate with their mass deportation plans, they're going to cut off federal funding. What does that mean? I'll tell you that after the break. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Talk media for the sane among us. I'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls. And welcome back. Daniel in New Orleans. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was to Lee from Idaho. They talking about how the over-the-air TV was tilted right. And I wanted to say that any place in Idaho, they can't really use like public radio. It's like NPR and your college stations. And I wanted to ask you, do you think when Trump gets in that he'll probably try to shut them down or at least get rid of CPB?
Yeah, he's already said so. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking, and Elon Musk, for that matter, has trash-talked the Organization for Public Broadcasting and National Public Radio, and they want to defund them from all federal funding. Now, the fact of the matter is federal funding only accounts for, I believe, around 7% of their budget. It's relatively small, so they will probably be able to continue. They'll just have to step up their fundraising drives. But, this is part of the this ongoing war against the truth that Republicans and conservatives have been waging for 40-some-odd years now. So, yeah, that's absolutely what's going to happen, Daniel. Absolutely. Thanks a lot for the call. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's on your mind today?
Hi there. Two things, but I think the most important thing to remind everyone is that 90 million people didn't vote. That's 90 million people, which is an unbelievable number.
Is that the number of people who are registered to vote who didn't, or the number of people who would be eligible to register to vote and who
would be eligible?
Okay.
Who would be eligible, but look, first thing you got to do is register, right?
Yeah.
First thing you got to do is you can vote in this country.
Most countries don't even have voter registration. You just show up and vote. It's.
The other thing is, Biden has gone along, will go along with everything that's necessary. There's one big departure I think he should do, and that is write Donald Trump a letter that they put in the Resolute desk, but make it public. And write something that the public will actually recognize to be, their warning. And, obviously in his gracious tone, but just letting everybody know that the last time, this could be the last letter for all everybody's concerned.
Right. And what would that letter say, Len, in your opinion?
Well, I would just, basically say that, you've broken norms, you've broken things. It seems like you like to break things.
Don't you think that'll put a smile on Trump's face?
And we're not going to let you break this country for your benefit.
Yeah. So a statement of defiance.
I wouldn't try to draft a letter, but I would put something in words that actually get published. And break that norm.
Yeah.
Because he's broken so many himself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. It would be a one day, maybe a 1 hour story in the media, but every little bit helps.
The other thing I would remind you every day is to remind people about the 90 million people that didn't vote.
Yeah, that didn't vote. We need to get Americans voting. You're right.
Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your neighbors.
There you go. Len, thank you very much. And thanks for watching us on YouTube. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. When Ronald Reagan took over America in 1981, we handed him a brand gleaming new country. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, they had built America. We had brand new schools, brand new hospitals, brand new interstate highway systems, brand new airports, infrastructure. We were the envy of the world. And then Republicans came along and they said, well, you just cut the top tax rate from 74% down to 27% and everything will trickle down. Instead, what do we get? Billionaires and poverty. They said, hey, just deregulate guns, an armed society is a polite society. Instead, we've got more school shootings than anywhere in the world. They said, just kill off civics and history classes in our schools and it'll liberate our young people to focus on science and math. Now we've got people who don't know how our government works. I mean, it just goes on from there. There's a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com titled FDR Saved America, Then the GOP Ripped Us Apart. Check it out.
The table's set, the candles glow, the autumn breeze begins to show. But more than harvest, more than feast, we're thankful for the fight that won't cease, for every voice that won't back down, for hands that build, for love unbound. We gather here with hearts so true, give our thanks for me and you. So let's raise a glass to those who care, who stand for justice.
Yep, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you have a very nice holiday. 22 minutes past the hour. Oh, hang on just a second, Skip. I was just going to put you on the air, but I got to do one quick story here, and then I'll grab you. Thom Hartmann, the incoming border czar, Donald Trump's incoming border czar. He was the acting director of ICE before, Customs and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He has said that they're going to end federal funding to states that refuse to go along. They refuse to, for example, turn their state police over to ICE because, ICE does not have the authority actually to arrest people in much of America. So what is federal funding? Well, Medicaid is the largest single federal grant to states, so those states could lose their Medicaid funding. Transportation grants are number 2, highways, bridges, public transit. Education grants, the Department of Education, this is the 3rd largest source of federal funding. Social services like TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, child care development. Community development block grants are number 5. These funds are used for community development projects. Number 6, environmental protection grants. Number 7, disaster relief funds. Number 8, public safety grants. That's, pretty straightforward stuff, helping your police departments and whatnot. Number 10, infrastructure investment and Jobs Act funds. That's, building our infrastructure all over the country. Number 11, income security grants like unemployment insurance, housing assistance. And number 12, job training and employment services grants. They help provide job training programs to enhance employment opportunities. So this is what Thom Hartmann says they're going to cut if blue states don't go along with Trump on trying to deport undocumented people in the country. It's going to get wild. It's going to get real wild. Skip in Morris County, New Jersey. Hey, Skip, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Let me take you off speaker. What's on my mind today, sir, is the symbolization and messaging for the resistance. You know, I mean, the MAGAs have their little red hats. I think we should have something. And I came up with this. I started it during the campaign. I go down to my bank. I get a sleeve of $2 bills, the Thomas Jefferson $2 bills. And when I put, you know, a tip jar or mom and pop store where I use cash, you know, I use $2. And I've got a couple of my friends doing it there. Oh, and of course, it drives our bank guy crazy because now they're wondering, why does this bank have all these $2 bills? Mm-hmm. But it might be a movement.
Interesting. So
what do you think?
As a way of, because Jefferson was the founder of the Democratic Party, you mean?
Yeah, I think he sort of represents democracy as much as any of the founders, and
Sure.
It's a very unused bill. And if we start seeing them out there, people will start, you know, like the whole house's restaurant thing. You know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I don't know. You know, it's
a few people doing it.
It's an interesting theory. I didn't know that you could even go into a bank and ask for $2 bills anymore. It's been a long time since I've seen one.
Yeah, neither did I. And when I went in there, my bank happened to have a client that liked them, so they have them. And I said, well, give me a sleeve of them.
Really?
And I've been using them, and a couple of my friends are using them.
That's what, 100 of them, $200 worth of $2 bills?
That would be $200.
$200, yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. You know,
And it works with the inflation. You know, $1 tips aren't quite enough. $5, maybe a little much, but
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, for traveling and things like that might be a great idea. It hadn't occurred to me before. Because you're right. Interesting. Skip, thank you. That was fascinating. Good luck. Good luck with that. It's 27 minutes past the hour. I'll be picking up your calls here on the other side of the break. What's on your mind today? Just a reminder, in a half hour, Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the full hour taking your calls. So we'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And yes, Louise is writing Thanksgiving songs. Be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by P.E. Moskowitz. It's The Case Against Free Speech, the First Amendment, Fascism, and the Future of Dissent. This is from the introduction. This book is not anti-free speech. It is anti the concept of free speech. It's an important distinction. Everyone should have the right to say what they want. I will not argue otherwise. I am not an authoritarian. In this book, I will not argue that the United States should adopt laws banning racist speech like the ones that have proliferated throughout Europe, for example. I think those laws are often counterproductive and end up being used against leftists instead of against racists. I won't argue that Nazi speech should be outlawed as it is in Germany. I won't argue that the First Amendment should be reformed nor more firmly upheld. This book is not about whether the First Amendment is good or bad. This book is about why the First Amendment is nearly irrelevant, except in its power as a propaganda tool. In the following chapters, I will argue that free speech as a concept is meaningless, that it is a dialectical smokescreen more than an ideal to be upheld, that in a grossly unequal society, in which a few corporations control the means of media dissemination and a small group of the ultra-wealthy bankroll entire political movements, there can be no meaningful definition of free speech. On paper, I'm free to speak as a billionaire. I am as free to speak as a billionaire. Yet I do not have the power to change laws through political donations, to influence college curricula, or to quash entire movements for economic liberation. And still, I hold more speech power than most. I am a published author, and my speech is sanctified by the gatekeepers of my publishing house. Therefore, the path to free speech, I will argue, has less to do with a law about speech, or many laws, than with ending racism and inequality. Throughout U.S. history, disparate groups have claimed to cherish free speech more than their enemies. Unionists in the 1920s saw free speech as synonymous with striking and ultimately class revolution. Today, conservatives are the group to most often shroud their politics in free speech, arguing that any silencing or protesting of their speech runs counter to U.S. values of freedom and liberty for all. But as I hope to prove in this book, free speech has never really existed, because freedom and liberty have never really existed for the vast majority of Americans. Instead, the U.S. has systematically acted against those values, suppressing the opportunities, speech, movements, and actions of the masses, especially people of color and anti-capitalists, in order to favor the free flow of capital to the owning class. This oppression and suppression have been constant since the founding of this country, and therefore free speech is a hollow signifier, pointing to a past that never existed. The funny thing about free speech is that it's been used to fight for and against these liberties, both as a guise for the wealthy and powerful to oppress the poor, like the Koch brothers and their supporters using free speech to push through anti-democratic legislation and rip apart campaign finance laws, and as a rhetorical tool for the working class to further their cause, as happened in the early 1900s when leftists argued that free speech includes the freedom to riot, and the ACLU argued it was the only way to prevent a violent revolution. I don't argue that one definition of free speech is more legitimate than the other, but that they are all relatively empty signifiers, hiding more tangible structures of power and ideas underneath them. So why write a book on free speech if I think the term is essentially meaningless? Because the concept holds so much weight in our country. We argue endlessly about whether it's being trampled on, whether college students hate it, whether the government is adequately upholding it, but we rarely ask what free speech is, or how we got to the free speech crisis we supposedly face today. When you scratch the surface of conversations over free speech, you find more difficult issues underneath. It's much easier to talk about the ability of conservatives to speak on college campuses than about the systemic racism, sexism, and transphobia college students experience. And those are the things that students who protest campus visits by right-wing conservatives are actually fighting against. It's easier to fantasize about a country that values free speech than to grapple with the fact that we place so much emphasis on free speech while jailing dissidents and allowing tens of millions to live in poverty. What is free speech to someone who works 60 hours a week and has no time nor any platform to use their supposed right? There is relatively little literature and philosophy on free speech, despite the fact that it has been in constant contention since the founding of this country. Even the legal history of the First Amendment is sparse for something so foundational to the values of our country. A few have seriously grappled with ideas of what free speech does and does not mean, most notably literary theorist Stanley Fish, who has argued that the term does not mean much at all. Leftists like Noam Chomsky have written about free speech tangentially in their explorations of media as a propaganda tool. Most history books on speech are written as hagiographies, unquestioning the intent of the Founding Fathers and their morals, with a few notable exceptions, such as Laura Weintraub's The Taming of Free Speech. I don't intend to fill the yawning gap of research history and philosophy. This is not a definitive account of free speech, but a necessary intervention, prodding us to be more critical of the term, and maybe along with it, of the other lofty concepts we must hold near and dear. The case against free speech.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. America is suffering from an epidemic of bullying. And one of the things we know is that culture, including bullying, flows from the top down. We've seen studies where when issues of For example, being gay or transgender are being debated in the public. Gay and transgender kids in school are more likely to be bullied. When racial issues are being discussed, people of minority races are more likely to be bullied. Well, now we've got a man who has literally built his career on being a bully, Donald Trump, as president, or was president, as candidate. And he is driving this insane bullying campaign and using it as a political weapon across the United States. And it's contagious. It's dangerous. There's an entire article about it over at HartmannReport.com titled America's New Epidemic, A Nation Overrun by Bullies. Check it out.
Nixon made the call in the dead of night, sabotaged the peace to secure his fight. Watergate broke, but the lies were deep. That's how the GOP started to cheat. Reagan's deal with the Ayatollah's hand kept the hostages to win the land. Behind closed doors, they struck their deals. For power and greed, they turned the wheels. The GOP's illicit path to power, breaking laws, hour by hour. From Nixon's games to Trump's big lie, they'll do anything just to climb high. Cheat the system, rig the vote, leave democracy barely afloat. This is how they seize the hour, the GOP's illicit path to power.
Welcome back, 36 minutes past the hour. Claire in Chicago. Hey, Claire, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Hi. I was calling. Can you hear me?
Just fine.
Oh, great. Hey, I was calling because I listen to various podcasts, yours mostly. I love your show.
Thank you.
I listened to Lights On with Jessica Denson, and she had guest Duncan Buell, the security expert, on.
Mm-hmm.
And have you had him on your show, or are you planning to have Duncan Buell on your show to discuss?
I am not familiar with him.
Okay, he's an election data. He's been following data breaches.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's connected with the website freespeechforpeople.org. But anyway, they had a discussion on, I believe it was yesterday, going about the breaches and things that don't match up, and they don't understand why the media is not talking about it. And I just wanted to know if, I know you had Stephen Spoonerton?
Stephen Spoonermore. Yeah.
Stephen Spoonermore.
Yeah, he was on the program last Monday, week ago today.
Yeah, I saw that. But this Duncan Buell is an associate of his,
mm-hmm.
and he was one of the signatories on that letter that went to Kamala Harris that they need to investigate. And I wondered what your take is on that. If you plan to have more guests on. I mean, we're running out of time if we're going to do this.
We've already run out of time. I think it's past. There's no possibility at this point that the election is going to be reversed or any serious challenge to it. The challenge now is going to be, if something wrong happened, to try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And the big concern, my big concern, is that we know that a number of these voting machines in 2020 were basically stolen, and their software was released into the wild. And Elon Musk then tweets, anything could be hacked. And there's concerns that, in particular, the tabulators might have been hacked, but I have yet to see any convincing evidence of it, Claire. I hear these assertions, but I have not seen the actual evidence, and that worries me. I don't want to go down a conspiracy rabbit hole here. Spoonermore is usually pretty solid.
Just because we're wanting to do something about it doesn't make us conspiracy theorists.
Correct.
It's so different. It's just like we're not supposed to. I mean, my belief is this isn't right.
No, I expressed my concerns and my doubts. I have some I'm very concerned about it. I just don't know where to look. I would love to see Stephen Spoonermore's evidence that there were all these bullet ballots in Arizona and Nevada and not anywhere else. I have not seen that evidence.
Duncan Buell, if you check him out, he have him as a guest. He's a data expert, and he's one of the signatories on that letter with Brown University. All of the respected people in data who's telling her we need to look into this. And I don't think we're out of time, actually. I think we're close, but I don't think it's too late. I believe that's what they said.
I will look into it, Claire. I'll look into it. Thank you very much for the call. Chris in Kokomo, Indiana. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, you'd said something about cows were eating chicken crap and that chickens in a third cage down don't get through food. You're so far off the base.
You can look it up.
I kind of wonder what else you're so far off base on. I can look it up. I'm a farmer. I could take you to 10 chicken houses right now and show you that's not the case.
Well, it's probably not the case in most places, but it certainly has been the case in the past. I've
well, then why would you speculate? Why would you speculate and act
well, it's not speculation, Chris. You can look up the fact that they're feeding cows chicken feathers and feces. You can look it up.
No, they're not, Tom. I'm in the industry. It makes a guy wonder how much stuff you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, Chris, you're not. Apparently, you're not running a factory farm.
Oh, I can take you to 10 of them within 15 miles of here. If you want to come, we'll go right now.
All right. Hang on just a second. While we're talking, let me just do what I'm assuming you did, but cows fed chicken.
I don't have to do that, Tom. It doesn't happen.
Feathers. Okay. University of Nebraska Medical Center. Some experts worry that chicken litter being fed to cows contains traces of the bird flu virus. Forbes magazine, May 1st, 2024. Bird flu outbreaks have affected 34 dairy cow herds across the 9 states, causing some to question whether the use of contaminated poultry feces and feathers fed to cows is a good idea. That's Forbes magazine. Alabama Cooperative Extension Service feeding broiler litter to beef cattle. Broiler litter is a good source of supplemental protein, energy, and minerals, especially for brood cows and stocker cattle. Mother Jones, we feed cows chicken poop. This is from 2013. That's an old one. The other ones that I all read to you were all from the last year. Chicory Hill Farm feeding chicken manure to cows. Quote, cattle are being fed chicken poop, feathers, and even dead chickens. It's perfectly legal, and it's a common practice in factory farming. Los Angeles Times, avian flu. This is from April 18th, 2024. The headline, avian flu outbreak raises a disturbing question. Is our food contaminated? Poultry litter consists of manure, feathers, spilled feed, and chicken litter cannot be fed to lactating cows under California law. Chris, look it up. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. I just read you the first 10 entries that came up on a Google search. You can do that.
It's baloney, Tom. It's baloney.
Do you know how to use a computer, Chris?
Tom, I can take you to the farms and show you.
I am so happy to hear that in Kokomo, Indiana, you got farms that are not doing this, because I think it's crazy. But I'm telling you, it's happening out there. And there's concern that it might be something that will lead to bird flu. And a number of the people who have gotten bird flu from animals have gotten them from cows. And in every single case, and again, you can look this up too, in every single case, those cows were eating what's called chicken litter. So there you go. Chris, I got to move along. I appreciate the call, though. Pat in San Diego. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Tom. I was just talking to my son in Seattle, and he's, of course, upset about the election and that he can't survive in Seattle on $80,000 a year. But he mentioned that in the last few weeks, he's been more depressed, and it reminded me of your time in Detroit. And I was unable to find that article. Can you help me guide me to that about your light booth and all that?
Oh, geez, I'm not sure that it's been a long time since I wrote about that, but yeah, when I lived in Michigan, I noticed that every winter I was getting depressed, not suicidal, but just feeling down, and that was in the 70s. That was in the early 70s, and Louise and I were living in this old house in Okemos, and I built a light box out of 2x4s and I put some fluorescent bulbs in it and put a lens over the front of it, and I just sat in front of it every morning for about 25 minutes, and it resolved my depression symptoms. And, now for the last, 15, 20 years, I've got lights in the studio that are on. So for 3 hours every morning, I'm sitting here with a lot of light in my face, and I haven't experienced any of that seasonal depression since. But it's a common thing. It's called seasonal affective disorder, SAD, and you can look it up. And there are companies, you can buy them on Amazon. I mean, there's companies that sell light boxes specifically to treat seasonal affective disorder. And you just, the other thing that Louise and I do is, you can buy these. The one that we got was Philips Hue, but you can buy these things that will remotely control the lights in your house, And I've got a light. We have lights on the end tables on either side of our bed in the bedroom. And at 5:30 in the morning, those lights come on, even though it's dark outside until 7 o'clock now here in Portland. But those lights come on, and they come on bright, and that's what wakes us up. And it's not only is it a great way to wake up, it's nonviolent. It's not like, having an alarm go off, which makes you jump, oh my God. It's a gentle way of waking up, number one. But number two, I think that probably has a positive effect too. And again, you can buy lights, alarm clocks that have lights built into them that are designed to shine right on your face as you're sleeping to wake you up with the light rather than a sound. Sometimes you can combine the sound with music. So the technology is out there, Pat. It's easy to find. And
going from San Diego to Seattle probably exacerbated that. One
absolutely.
More quick thing. How many people do you think didn't vote because they were concerned about civil war if Trump didn't win?
I doubt that was an influence on many people at all, Pat. I think most people who didn't vote either because they thought Kamala had it in the bag or because they just didn't know the great accomplishments of the Biden administration. Pat, I got to run. Thanks for the call. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your calls. Welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today? Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, and just want to wish you well.
Thank you, Bob. Back at you.
Yeah, changing of the guard and so forth. And, well, I'll just get right down to it. I think the election is affected, of course, by public opinion. I think the public at large, is my experience on this earth through time, it tells me that the public at large is just sick and tired of this two-party system and the level of hypocrisy that is oozing out of every crack in the ship.
So what's your solution, Bob? What's your solution?
I don't think there's any one solution.
I think there is. Get rid of Citizens United. Get big money out of politics. When you don't have bribes being offered any longer, you won't have bribes being taken.
That's true. I'm agreeing with you 100% there. Yeah, if that can be done, but yeah, that's something I support. Absolutely. That would make a big difference. There's other things that would make a difference that are related to that. And why those other things don't happen, of course, is related to the Citizens United thing. Mm-hmm. And participation, I just want to reflect for just briefly, and I'll get off of here. A previous caller talking about chicken houses and cows and the chickens and so forth. Well, here's a prime example of something that I just want to talk about for just a second. It has to do with the psychology of all this. It has to do with how we're conditioned through the years and that first 5 years of upbringing and then the next few years of education, if we get any, and how that affects us through our lives and what we believe. The whole thing about belief versus knowledge. Are you following a path of faith, which is to put reality on hold? For all practical purposes, that's what faith is. You put reality on hold, and you just hold fast to that which is good. Render to no man evil for evil, etc. Okay, I'm all with that, but the being based in faith, I think faith is a good thing. think love.
You know, an awful lot of what we do all the time, Bob, is based on faith. I mean, Paul famously said, you know, faith is the belief in things unseen. But you don't see electricity, yet we trust that when we turn the light switch on, you know, the lights are going to light up, or we're not going to get electrocuted.
You can see electricity. Watch the sky. You can see power.
Yeah, well, okay. I actually, what you're seeing is the effect of electricity. But yes.
Okay, but don't look for very long at the sun. There's a power for you. Don't look very long at it. Don't stay out in it very long. And that can be, you know, the physics of what is real. Yeah, we can't know everything. We're here just learning. We're not wanting to wipe it out. We don't believe in the end times.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people
Bob, what's the point you're trying to make?
The point I'm trying to make is that previous caller, and you're talking about chickens and cows and stuff, we do have the capacity to hold conflicting thoughts in our head at the same time. We can have faith and be knowledge-based.
I see. Okay, yeah, I'll go along with that. Bob, thanks for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically, just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out.
Words unsaid, the hurt we've known can grow with seeds of love or soul. A kind embrace, a gentle smile can turn the bitter into worthwhile. Forgiveness flows like autumn rain, washing away the hurt and pain. At Thanksgiving, they start anew with hearts united, strong and true. This Thanksgiving, we choose to mend, to find the strength to love again. With gratitude, we'll light the way. This Thanksgiving, let peace stay. The table's set, the candles glow. A gentle peace begins to show.
Before the hour, picking up your calls here. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Pretty good? Okay. Hey, you had a caller last week that mentioned the Vemork power plant in Norway during, the Nazi occupation of Norway. And you questioned him about his age. He said he was like 5 or 6 at the time. I thought that was a remarkable
He was in his 90s, yeah.
Yeah, and of course you would question anybody about their age that says they can recall those events. But his point was, he can't believe that Americans can't see what's going on. Yeah. And this is the problem I'm having, Tom. Look, they were talking about the Tulsi Gabbard nomination, right? Mm-hmm. And there was an African-American guy. And he said that African Americans get caught up in the Quiet Skies program and other programs routinely. It's no big deal. And then he said Tulsi Gabbard doesn't want to do so much domestic surveillance. And then he went on to say maybe Russia does have a point with the expansion of NATO. What we know is all that is not true. Right? Tulsi Gabbard and frankly, fought alongside me in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I saw it in 2007. What happened is they have either real or perceived feelings of failure in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what they started doing is rebelling by believing in this utopian 1950s where, where everybody knew their place, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the point, Tom. They actually prospered from it. So,
yeah, I'm sorry, Dave. Your phone is breaking up. Try saying that again. Here's the bottom line.
Yeah, the bottom line is there is a generational gap. I mean, they don't. This is why these generals that promoted Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth, they sort of vaguely remember the 1950s, and they know that this utopia doesn't exist. Right. And frankly, that's my point about. I want to make a point about blue states separating. I get it. People want to separate because maybe they have a child or a loved one that's at risk from these Republicans. I get it that you say it's constitutionally not viable. I respect all that. But, Tom, I'm coming from somewhere else. I almost believe if we ever want to see the American dream manifest, that it would have to be some sort of secession.
Blue state secession.
Rather in a utopian.
I get it.
I see it in a utopian way.
I get it, Dave. And it's a big conversation for another time, but your point is well made. Thank you very much. Roosevelt in Chicago. Hey, Roosevelt, thanks for listening. What's up?
Hello, Tom. How you doing, man?
Fine, thank you.
I was listening to the guy from Kokomo, Indiana, and he was talking about how he could walk outside his house and go to farms and see that wasn't happening. Now, that may be true if those are family farms. Family farms wouldn't do that.
Right.
But I would suggest to everyone, if you really want to know what 95% of the meat processed in this country, what it goes through, there's a book called Eating Animals. I forgot the author's name, but it's called Eating Animals, and it'll tell you about them factory farms, and they are much worse than what you even cited.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could just Google factory farms, and you find these videos, that are taken inside them surreptitiously. It's pretty amazing. You're right, Roosevelt. It's pretty brutal.
So, what I wanted to talk about, the subject I call about is democracy. You ever heard of an author by the name of Barbara Walters?
Yeah, I have.
She wrote a book called How Civil Wars Started and How to Stop Them.
Yeah, I've read the book. In fact, I wrote an article about the book.
In the book, a professor from, I think it was the University of Nebraska, gave a polity index score for democracy and autocracy, and anocracy was in the middle.
Yeah, and we're in bad shape. Roosevelt, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but it's an excellent book. I agree with you. I just read it a couple of weeks ago, actually, or maybe a month or two ago. Thank you, Roosevelt. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
Fight back!
Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries It was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome to Hour 3 of our program. On the line with us is our old buddy, Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents California's 17th District in the U.S. It is basically Silicon Valley. You can find his website at khanna.house.gov, KHANNA.house.gov. And Congressman, you have a presence on Blue Sky, I assume?
I do. We're growing a fast following there. Rep. Ro Khanna, given post the election. Good to be back on, Tom. I was traveling a lot over the last two months for the campaign. Unfortunate outcome, but I'm glad I'm back on.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you back with us. Before we pick up calls here, and the board is solid. We got people all over the country who want to talk to you. But before we get to that, I'm just curious your thoughts on the election, on where the Democratic Party goes from here, on who will be the emerging, what is the current leadership and what will be the emerging leadership of the Democratic Party, and why are we not seeing Democrats every single day on the news, basically pushing back against Trump and his picks and everything else?
Well, a lot of questions there. I mean, let me start out with this point. I think Bernie Sanders has been absolutely right. And I have no doubt, by the way, that if Bernie Sanders were 15 years younger, he'd be president of the United States in 2028. I think
agreed.
There is a clear sense and understanding that the economic system has been rigged for the past 50 years. Working class and middle class families have been falling behind. Wealth's been concentrating in places like my district. There's been an unholy alliance of wealth and power that has left people feeling frustrated. And Trump tapped into that anger and that frustration, and he blamed trans people and immigrants and China, and we didn't do enough to blame a rigged system and have a sweeping set of change that would inspire people and feel that, okay, America is going to do this and finally going to get them back into having a decent life. And to me, that is the opportunity. The exciting thing is there is no leader of the Democratic Party right now. And it is in one sense, okay, it's a leaderless party, but there's also a lot of great new voices emerging, whether it's Andy Beshear or Westmore, AOC or Greg Kazar. And I'm purposely mentioning people in different wings of the party. Hopefully there is a new generation, but that new generation understands that what Bernie Sanders has been trying to say, which is it's got to be around an economically populist agenda, a modern version of FDR. I don't understand why that's such a hard case, given that he did win 4 terms, and having some hybrid of sort of his industrialization and new economic development and Bernie's policies and a critique of the money in politics, in my view, is a winning message.
Now, reality test this for me, please. This is my assertion. Joe Biden is the first Democratic president since Jimmy Carter to repudiate neoliberalism. And Carter actually, in the last 2 years of his presidency, started to embrace it. But, Biden was really the guy who took us back to FDR's policies in a big way, as you well know. And I'm of the opinion that if he had simply done what Donald Trump did for 4 years, which is every day, or at least every other day, walk out in front of the White House and talk to the press and tell them what the hell he's doing and brag on the economy, that we wouldn't have this situation where 83% of Republicans and 63 or 64% of all Americans believed that America was in a recession as we went to vote. I mean, whenever the country's in a recession, the party in power always loses. And this lie that had been promulgated by right-wing hate radio and by Republicans and Fox News for 4 long years, in my opinion, was never successfully pushed back on by the administration. I lay a lot of the blame for Kamala Harris not winning this election with the failures of the Biden administration to communicate. And I get it that Joe Biden, stumbles when he talks. But he should have had Kamala Harris out there every day for 4 years. What say you?
I think communication is a huge issue. I look, FDR was paralyzed and managed to communicate. I get that it was a different time, but it wasn't that it wasn't that he was
weekly
born
fireside
with
chats.
He figured out how to communicate despite his obvious disabilities. And, I once said, I don't mind saying, I said, public, I had a conversation with Ron Klain, and Ron Klain says, the pundit class doesn't like Joe Biden because he's not good and eloquent on cable news and he's not good on TV, but he's a great legislator, great president. I said, that's like saying he's a great actor, he just can't deliver the lines. The whole job of the presidency in modern times, a lot of it is communication, and there was a communication breakdown. Now, it didn't have to be a triumphalist communication. It didn't have to say, the economy's great, economy's great. It could have said, we were in a 50-year hole. I'm the first president, as you put it, who's actually trying to dig us out of it. I got left a terrible hand. And you know what? Here's the progress we've made. But by the way, I can't dig out a 50-year hole in 3 years. This is why people are still really hurting and struggling. And here's what we're going to continue to do. And by the way, I won't end it even in 8 years. It's going to probably take 15 years to get us out of this hole that we've been in for 50 years. And that was basically FDR's 36 message. We made progress, but things are still really bad for a lot of Americans. But I think that a lot of great policies, not sufficient communication or story for the American people.
Yeah, so we're singing the same song. So should we pick up calls?
Would love to.
Okay, let's do it. Jordy in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna. Jordy in Seattle, listening on 91.3 FM. Going once, going twice. Tom in Los Angeles. Hey, Tom, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. Morning, Tom. This is Tom from GL Pages. Anyway, Ro, I need to ask you a question, and I'm going to keep on bugging people online and everything like that to hold their feet to the fire. But do you consider yourself an FDR Democrat? And then I have a second follow-up as well.
I do. I mean, I believe that FDR's policies were horrific, and I would say an FDR Democrat, but I also think American politics disdains clones, and I think we need to take FDR's fundamental vision of I call it a new economic deal, and add to it modern technology and the know-how of innovation to really have sweeping economic reindustrialization in America, and also empower workers. So we take the blueprint, but invent it in our own, as every American generation should.
And are you willing to stand for the tax rate under FDR and Eisenhower and endorse FDR's second economic Bill of Rights? Because, number one, I think Bernie's got the right message, but Bernie never embraced FDR. Nobody has talked about FDR more than Thom Hartmann. And this is something that needs to be said all the time, is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. If you don't want to use FDR, use Franklin Delano Roosevelt and talk about the New Deal and talk about what it was that he did in the 30s to bring us out of this mess that we are in.
Yeah.
Because honestly, we're almost at the 30s
Let's get the
again,
answer
and we're
here,
going to end up
Tom.
with the same
You're
problem.
starting to break up.
Well, look, I love it. My whole platform, I call it new economic deal. Someone said, isn't that too derivative of FDR? I said, well, if Trump can still make America great again for Reagan, if I talk about a new economic deal and it harkens to FDR but is also forward-looking, that's terrific. And the tragedy of Elon Musk is he could have been one of the $1-a-year men, because FDR was gendered, in terms of building America with unions instead of just dismantling government. But I think FDR is a great model. I certainly for a wealth tax, and believe that people who have done incredibly well should pay more tax. But the thing that FDR had was it was not just that we give people education and housing. It was a vision for economic dynamism in every part of America, and the combination of we're going to be the top producer in the world, we're going to be the top economy in the world, plus everyone is going to have health care and a job and child care, education. I think that's a winning message for Democrats. At least let's try it. It won us four terms.
There you go. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing California's 17th District. He is with us here on the Thom Hartmann Program in a National Progressive Townhall meeting, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Khanna in just a moment. You can follow him on Blue Sky. You can find him on Twitter. You can find, and his website is khanna.house.gov.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's a National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. Stay with us. And welcome back. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, I want to find out, when are our Democratic leadership going to take off the gloves and start fighting? I think you people in Washington right now, the Democrats, are misled. I don't think you realize that on January 20th, we're going to have a dictator. The Constitution is going to be suspended. And between now and then is the only time we can do something, and I don't see the Democrats doing anything.
Well, see, I was just on before the show talking to Kyle Kulinski and Crystal Ball, and they were saying the same thing, that while there was all this resistance energy in 2017, they don't see that energy right now. And I think it'd be a mistake to just go along with this radical agenda. We need to be vigilant of the mass deportation raids that could happen, and be diligent in standing up to the violations of Americans' rights if employers are raided. And also the rights of some of the undocumented. We need to be vigilant to the cuts they may have to education, Social Security, Medicare, the use of the Justice Department. I just heard one of the Pam Bondi talking about going after people like Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it is going to be a very, very difficult time. And I don't think just saying, okay, Donald Trump won, so we've gone from saying that he's an existential threat to democracy to now saying, okay, let's find common ground is the right approach. We've got to be not blanket resistance, but clear-eyed, strong-willed, steel-spine resistance to things that are violating the Constitution.
Joe in Cupertino, California. You're on the air with Congressman, I believe you're Congressman Khanna.
Tom, I wanted to wish you and your happy Thanksgiving, and Congressman, congratulations on your reelection. My question is about the post office. And I've been seeing some inconsistencies around here in the Postal Service. And they're not wearing their uniform, and oftentimes I don't get mail but maybe 3 times a week. We just had an election, and we haven't gotten rid of DeJoy. So I'm wondering if there's something that the new Congress can do in order to have a more oversight over the U.S. Postal Service. And I'll take my answers there. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I've been calling for DeJoy's firing for years, and apparently the board now has that power, and they can. Congress has no oversight over the board, but the board has now Biden appointees, and my hope is that they will hold him accountable. The tragedy of it is that DeJoy wants to privatize the one thing that still is a public good in this country. I mean, you can't have FedEx or UPS send mail at the rate that it goes with a safety record and delivery record at 50 cents. It's just one of the few things that you could be a billionaire or a working class person and still use.
Do you think that postal banking will ever come about? Bernie's been a champion for that forever.
I absolutely hope and believe it should. I mean, look, if you're going to cap interest rates to 10%, people say, well, what if they have less credit cards for people who are low income? I said, well, let's do postal banking and loans. I don't want people who are low income going into credit card debt at 30%. Well, how's that good? So having some form of postal banking or having some form of alternative banking for low-income folks is absolutely key.
Yeah, and even having low fee or no fee checking accounts. I mean, it's amazing. If you keep 10 grand in your checking account, you never pay a penny. But if you're poor, you pay for every check you write. That's crazy. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be right back in 60 seconds with more of your calls for Representative Khanna. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
It started on a quiet farm just before the big day, when Farmer Joe came down the road with his axe and a bale of hay. The turkeys huddled in the barn, whispering their grand plan. We've had enough of stuffing and gravy, time to take a stand. It's the Great Turkey Uprising, feathers in the air. They're marching to the farmhouse with a gobble and a glare. Knives and forks
What happened this year? I don't think so. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom, Congressman Khanna. I just saw a report on MSM today that President Biden has agreed to supply Ukraine with the Joint Standoff Surface Missile, which is a benefit to Ukraine, not only because of its increased range of over 200 miles, but it can be launched from the F-16 fighters, which means that, Ukraine is no longer limited to using U.S. land-based missile systems such as the HIRAMs and ATACMS. I'm wondering whether Congressman Khanna can confirm that report, and whether he's also worried about any potential Russian response.
I haven't followed the details of what the president has authorized recently, but I certainly support supplying Ukraine with all of the military, artillery, and equipment they need to defend their homeland and the integrity of of Ukraine. And I fear that Donald Trump is going to give 1/5 of Ukraine to Putin and Russia. I think the president is right to make sure that Ukraine has all of the support before he leaves, so that he puts them in as strong a position as possible before Trump gets into office.
Larry in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. Recently, we all saw the Fed cut the Fed rate by 50 basis points, and this is after the Fed had increased the Fed rate by 550 basis points. Each percentage point is 100 basis points. Over the years, since Carter, the Fed has increased the Fed rate by 25% for Democratic presidents. They cut it by 23% for Republicans. That's 2,500 points for the Democrats, 2,300 points cut for the Republicans. That causes the American people to feel like that things are not working for them when Democrats are president. Is there any way that the congressmen or even the senators can call Powell into a hearing room and ask him, how is that bipartisan? How is that not partisan? How is it that he's being fair to Democratic presidents and not giving Republicans a huge break?
Well, I didn't know those statistics. They're pretty sobering, and if true, I think it merits examination. I think Trump himself once joked that if he were born again, he'd want to come back as Fed chair, not as president. It's amazing how much power the Fed has, and I think they were too late in seeing inflation, and then they raised rates too fast and didn't start to lower. I mean, didn't lower the rates in time, but. I'll have to look more at the partisan thing. Tom, do you have any sense? I mean, you usually follow these things about why that partisan pattern emerged.
Yeah, Larry's been talking about this on this program for years. He's a real kind of Fed expert, and I looked it up, and he's right, as far as I can tell. It could just be the coincidence. I mean, another statistic that Larry gave me maybe a year ago that I've looked up and is also accurate is that every Republican president since Nixon has had a recession, and not one single Democratic president has. The closest we got was Carter, who inherited a recession, from Jerry Ford, the whip inflation now, if you remember that. And so it might be that, if the Democrats don't have recessions, that means that the economy is expanding, and the Fed thinks the economy is expanding too fast. And so it hits them with rate increases. And then when Republicans come in, they do tax cuts, and you almost always have, well, according to Larry, every single time there's been a major tax cut, it's been followed within a year by a major recession. And then the Fed tries to get us out of that by lowering interest rates. I mean, that's the only, can we make sense out of this? But it is, Larry's been giving me an education here for a couple of years. He's a good guy.
Well, Larry, I think I'll talk to Brendan Boyle, who's on the Budget Committee. I think it's worth trying to call in Powell to see what their explanation is.
Yeah, it's kind of the cycles of history and the cycles of all this. I just have 40 seconds here before we hit a hard break. I'm curious your thoughts on what's going to happen after January 20th and how Democrats are going to respond.
I think we've got to stiffen our spines. I think we've got to be really prepared to oppose Donald Trump in a few key areas, taxes being the first. I mean, he's going to propose tax cuts to the very wealthy. He's going to propose tax cuts to more corporations, offshoring. And we've got to say, no, we want to tax the offshoring of these jobs and tax the rich and give the benefit to working class. And then he's going to way overreach on issues like mass deportation, violating rights. And we've got to stand up for the Constitution. So we need to be prepared to respond to his agenda.
Yeah, especially if he suspends the Constitution by declaring a state of emergency, right?
Absolutely. And, Americans are going to get caught up in this, too, if he starts using the military for enforcement.
Yeah, it happened the last two times. An estimated 20% of all the people deported in the last two major deportations were American citizens. We'll be back with Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's our National Progressive Townhall meeting with Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna. Stay with us.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Separated by the Border, a birth mother, a foster mother, and a migrant child's 3,000-mile journey by Gina Thomas. This is from the introduction. How good is your Spanish? And would you be able to take in a 4-year-old girl? She's from Honduras and speaks minimal English. The social worker had texted me on a Friday afternoon. I sat at my desk, bent over my cell phone, reading and rereading the text. My thoughts traveled to Honduras, bachata, ballades, clothes hanging on the line. So many things in our lives seem to have prepared us for this moment. My son was attending a bilingual school. I'm a former ESL teacher, and my husband Andrew and I speak Spanish. Plus, Honduras already had a piece of my heart. As those thoughts came, I tried to push them away. The voice of logic came in loud and strong. We had just gotten into a routine with Emma, our foster daughter. 2 foster children and 2 biological children would be too much for us to handle. Our first month as foster parents taught us this, and for the sake of everyone involved, we knew it would be very unfair to try that again. A little later, the social worker called and left me a message saying, "It looks like the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the ORR, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, will get her on Monday in court. It'll only be the weekend. Call me back after you talk to Andrew." I asked Andrew when I got home, "We can manage 4 kids for one weekend, right?" He said he doubted it would last only a weekend, but I convinced him that if ORR and ICE were involved, they would get her on Monday. A few minutes later, I called our social worker and said that we'd do it. When I walked into the social worker's office, Julia was sitting there in a brand new bright pink Barbie t-shirt. The social worker said they'd found the t-shirt in their clothing closet and Julia wanted it. Beautiful, soft onyx curls framed the girl's umber face. Her dark complexion made me speculate she was from a coastal region. She stood in dirty flip-flops next to the social worker's chair, chit-chatting away in Spanish without a care in the world. "Julia's been talking my ear off," the social worker said. "She's so sweet, but I have no idea what she's saying." Another worker brought in a black tote bag with a few other items from the clothing closet, including a pair of sequined high-top sneakers that Julia had picked out. I began to speak to Julia, pronounced Julia, in Spanish. She seemed happy to hear her mother tongue, but her body language didn't budge. I read that signal loud and clear, so I kept my distance and sat down on the floor. "¿Cómo se llama?" I asked. "Julia." "¿Cuántos años tienes?" "How old are you?" "Cuatro," 4. She looked older than 4 to me. I had been told her parents were deported and she was left behind. She was under federal jurisdiction. I would find out later this was all misinformation. I signed some papers and said, "We'll see you on Monday." I asked Julia if she would come stay with me and my family for the weekend. She smiled. I told her I had 3 other kids. Her eyes expanded with excitement. On the drive home, she jolted my Spanish from its slumber. The social worker wasn't kidding about how much this little one talked. On April 6, 2018, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a new zero-tolerance policy in which the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice would partner for the sake of prosecuting illegal entry into the United States. Sessions said, quote, "If you cross this border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you. It's that simple. If you smuggle aliens across our border, then we will prosecute you. If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child will be separated from you as required by law. If you don't like that, then don't smuggle children over our border." End quote. 6 weeks later, almost 2,000 children had been separated from their parents at the border since the zero-tolerance policy took effect. When Sessions announced the administration's new policy, I couldn't comprehend the cruelty. I also wondered if it explained why a preschooler was living under my roof. Julia had come to live with me and my family in February of 2018, and it felt surreal to be a part of her story. She had first been separated from her mother, Guadalupe, called by her nickname Lupe through the rest of this book, by smugglers who were paid to bring them across the border. Julia had then been separated from her stepfather, Carlos, by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, likely because what was recognized by the Honduran government as stepfather was not recognized by the U.S. government as the same, a detail I didn't understand until an immigration expert read the first draft of this book and explained it. Julia had already suffered much trauma, and separating her from her stepfather had only inflicted more. The weight of the trauma that we, as a nation, began inflicting on vulnerable children and their parents was cruel and unusual punishment. When I heard that my own country was going to begin separating children regularly from their parents as a policy, it broke me. Reality became surreal, and Andrew and I learned to live in it, separating the trauma from our emotions so that we could survive. As the veil of Oz is ever lifting from my white evangelical American eyes, what I now see is simply heartbreaking. Government-secured human rights are mostly for privileged white people. Julia is not white. Julia is undocumented. Julia's first language is Spanish. Julia is a girl. These are all labels that set her back in a society made by and for white, passport-holding, English-speaking males. But God, who is neither white nor male, despite my use of the pronoun he, shines his good news on every human being alike. The book is Separated by the Border by Gina Thomas.
Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag You're It. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, running on autopilot here. Colleen in Moore Park, California, you are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Well, hello. I am wondering if state of California can set up a federal bank account where California's taxpayers send their federal income tax to the state of California and hold it until a later date, mainly because, of course, he's not going to be sending us funds when we have fires and when we have floods and earthquakes. And our dollars should not be paying for kicking people out of the country. Is it possible to do something along those lines?
And Thom Hartmann, the border czar, just said that they're going to cut all federal funds to states that refuse to go along with the mass deportation scheme.
Well, Colleen, look, I am all for standing up, and we'll use all our power to stand up if he stops sending federal dollars to California, and I'm confident our delegation will fight for it. But I don't think I'm too much of a student of history and the Civil War to think that California should initiate stopping paying taxes. I mean, I think our party needs to be for the union, not facilitating its disintegration.
Ed in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Congressman, I don't know if there's an answer to this. We're kind of piggybacking off of a previous caller. I'm just wondering, as the Democratic leadership, are you guys talking about what you're going to do when the Republican Party and the House and the Senate basically go with a modern-day version of the Enabling Act and give Trump all their power? Because that's definitely what they're going to do. He's going to he's going to use recess appointments. He's going to be able to send federal troops in the blue states. You can say we're not going to allow him to come in and deport people. He'll use federal troops to do that. There's nothing in the House or the Senate or the Supreme Court that's going to stop him. I mean, I don't have any answers here, but I look at like Durbin and Schumer. You guys are acting like this is just another normal election, and our democracy isn't just about to be flushed. At least you guys could be pounding the table on this, and I don't see that happening anywhere.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do think we need to be sounding the alarm where things happen. And, and the activism can make a difference. I mean, Matt Gaetz' nomination obviously didn't go through. We need to have these hearings take place. We need to ask very, very tough questions of people like Pam Bondi on whether the politicization of the Justice Department. We need to ask tough questions and expose Thom Hartmann if he's going to violate human rights. But I have still faith in the decency of the American people when Trump overreaches. If we're vigilant and if we mobilize, that we're going to be able to oppose it. And that's what we were able to do in many instances on his first term. And we just have to be prepared to do that where he overreaches.
Dennis in Riverside, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, hello. Yeah, there's a way to challenge Mr. Trump, and I was reading an article in Harper's Magazine of last month on antitrust, and it praises Joe Biden to the skies on his efforts, even redoing China trade policies that Clinton put in place. And now would be the time to brag about Joe Biden's accomplishments. And then challenge Mr. Trump, are you going to reverse these? It's a simple line of attack, but it's, big theater politics. And that's what I think should be done about Joe Biden's legacy.
Well, I agree with you, Dennis. I think what we need to do is look at what are the things that Joe Biden has accomplished and outline things that Trump could try to reverse and point out to the American people what those are, whether it's antitrust and making sure he's taking on competition to lower prices, whether it is the Semiconductor Act that Joe Biden has gotten these factories back, the solar factories, the battery factories. Biden and all of us should be talking about these things that he's achieved, starting out with the conversation with Tom in the beginning, that if we had talked more about this, we'd be in a better place. We certainly should talk about it the next 2 months.
Vanola in Washington, D.C. Vanola, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hello. I have an issue to raise that I think Congressman Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders do not really appreciate. Bernie Sanders always comes out with a postmortem that you need to talk to working class people. Well, black people are the quintessential example of working class people, and we always find our way to the polls. So Bernie's problem is not with black working class people, it's with white working class people. But he never says so. He always speaks in code terms. So I find it very offensive whenever I hear that. Oh, the Democrats need to know how to talk to working class people. Well, we show up at the polls, we hear the message. We knew what was on the line. We were not the ones who abandoned the voting polls on November 5th. And Bernie needs to stop talking about it if he's not going to say he needs white working class people, because those are the ones who did not show up at the polls. And that's all I have to say. That's my rant, actually.
Thank you, Vanilla.
Well, Vanilla, I hear you, and certainly African-American women showed up, and I'm grateful to them for showing up, and I'm grateful for the vice president for making the valiant fight she did. But the reality is we've been losing working class voters, not just white working class, but also Latino working class, and in some cases, working class black men. I mean, all of the polling, the exit polling shows that Donald Trump did better across all of those demographics. And so I think what Bernie Sanders is saying is there's certain reasons that we're losing them. It has to do with the fact that they're not making as much money, that corporations are putting that money into stock buybacks, that their jobs aren't paying as high or as secure, that too many jobs have gotten offshore, and that if we have an agenda that really speaks to transformative economic change that's good for black, Latino, and white Americans, that we would capture back a lot of the people who are voting for Trump and under false pretenses.
Blue in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello. Nice to talk to you both. Congressperson, are you familiar with the 9 possible planetary tipping points?
I am not.
Okay. There's 6 of the 9 possible planetary tipping points that are in the process of tipping right now. And that would be like, they're irreversible once they get to a certain point. The way to reverse these exponential planetary tipping points is by exponentially planting forests. If you look at the 6 tipping points that are tipping, you'll see that by planting forests, you can reverse all 6 of those tipping points. And, Congressperson, we need to put heart rate variability biofeedback devices in public places. Heart rate variability is a way of checking whether someone is in fight or flight or rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic nerves and the sympathetic nerves.
Okay, I think we got it, Blue. Thank you. Congressman, did you want to comment on any of that?
You know, I'm all for planting more trees, having more forests. I think that that's a key part of the climate agenda, but we also have to transition massively to renewable energy. We also have to make sure that we aren't giving fossil fuel subsidies to big oil, but sure, on planting more trees and forests.
Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're listening on KTRC. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good day, gentlemen. First, a quick prediction. I predict Donald Trump will not enforce workplace violations when it comes to immigration. He's going to let the wealthy, say, meatpacking industry have their illegal immigrant workforce. And, progressive Democrats are way off base on the immigration issue. You know, you say you want to raise working wages for average American workers, but yet you don't want to enforce any workplace laws. Oh, why don't the Democrats, here's going to be a golden opportunity, you start beating the drum for workplace enforcement, because we know Trump is going to bail on that. He's going to let the wealthy have their workforce, and he's going to cause a distraction, and everybody will forget about it. So Democrats need to start beating the drum, workplace enforcement, because if you want to raise wages for the average American worker, you have to control the labor market. If you have unlimited flow of immigration into the country, you will never raise wages. So get on the right page, and let's have economic arguments about immigration instead of always pounding the drum of racism. It's an economic issue. Use economic arguments.
Brian. Got it. Thank you. Congressman?
Well, look, I'm all for employer enforcement. Tom and I have discussed this. Tom has talked about this, and that's different than mass deportation. I think that if you are going to fine employers, if you're going to force them to have fair labor conditions, if you're going to force them to have labor neutrality so you can have unionization, I think that is all positive. But the idea also blaming immigrants for lower worker wages just doesn't fully add up, because 40 to 50% of them are in meatpacking or picking crops. These are not the jobs that Americans are competing in, and immigrants are spending money. So while they're increasing the supply of labor, they're also increasing the demand. So the studies simply don't show that they're putting downward pressure. What is putting downward pressure on American workers is the decline in unions. It's the offshoring of jobs. It's the fact that we don't have the kind of industrial jobs and and good construction jobs and good service jobs that many Americans have. But that said, enforcement at workplaces and big business absolutely to improve labor conditions.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls for the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna of California, on the other side of this break with our National Progressive Townhall meeting. And welcome back. Louise in Savannah, Georgia. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I want to know why Biden will not step down and let Kamala Harris finish his term so she can do some executive orders. And also why she's not suing Donald Trump for scandal.
Well, Louise, it's up to President Biden in terms of finishing his term. I think he's done, by and large, a very good job as president, and I think that he should have the right to serve out his term. And, the vice president has a lot of options. She could become governor of California. She may get a chance to run again. So I support the president in finishing out his term. In terms of slander, I agree with you that there was a lot of terrible lies and misinformation, but I'm a believer in New York Times versus Sullivan that when you're in the public square that there's a lot of free speech, and it probably doesn't rise to the level of defamation or slander. But we do have an information ecosystem problem that the left has to figure out so that we can get the truth out there in an easier way.
Sammy in Moberly, Missouri. Sammy, you're on the air with Congressman. Moberly, okay.
I'm in Moberly, Missouri. Hi, Congressman Khanna. My question is, I'm disabled. I have multiple sclerosis, and I've been fighting it for 24 years. And I am wondering, how can Elon Musk control anything in our government when he is not an elected official, nor has anybody put him in government to look over our programs, our government programs, being that our education is going to be dismantled. I was not looking forward to staying disabled and becoming a counselor, but now that's not an option for me. The last 4 years has actually crippled me. So I just want to know, how can Elon Musk be over anything that has to do with personal business that belongs to we the people here in the United States?
Sammy, first of all, thank you for calling. I appreciate your courage and what you're going through for 24 years, and the fact that you still take seriously your citizenship and speaking out is a great tribute to your personal resilience. And I think it's so important for people like you to speak out, because the cuts that are being talked about, cuts to Title I educational funding. 15% of students in public schools have an IEP program because they're disabled in some way. These are the cuts that are on the table. Cuts to Medicare that could hurt people like you in terms of providing care to the disabled. Let me tell you something. Every single Democrat with every fiber of her being will oppose those cuts. And Elon Musk may have the appointment to make recommendations, but ultimately Congress has to pass those cuts. We're not going to do it as Democrats, and we need to fight to make sure that Republicans resist him, because Musk has no power if Congress doesn't go along.
Yeah, and he absolutely important point. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Khanna in about a minute, 60 seconds, or a little bit thereabouts, you know. And you can find his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. And he's on Blue Sky. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. People in the Rust Belt states know all about tariffs. They know that tariffs kept jobs in the Rust Belt states for centuries, literally, that America was built on tariffs. That's one of the reasons Donald Trump got elected in 2016, was because he talked about tariffs. But for some reason right now, you know, the Harris-Walz campaign, or Democrats in general, are reluctant to talk about tariffs. They call them sales taxes or something like that. They really need to be a little more straightforward, because people, particularly in the industrial Midwest, or in the Rust Belt, as we call it now, are not dumb. You know, they know what's going on. They know where we've been and how we got here. And I think it's pretty important to be talking about tariffs and what they are, how they work, and how they can bring manufacturing back home. I wrote a piece about it for Hartmann Report. It's titled, "Why Trump is Wrong and Alexander Hamilton Was Right About Tariffs." And I think you'll find it absolutely fascinating at hartmannreport.com. Check it out.
This Thanksgiving, we're here to say the Thom Hartmann crew thanks you every day for the calls you make, the thoughts you share, for the hope you bring and the fight you bear. You tune in strong, you stand up tall. Together we're answering democracy's call. This Thanksgiving, we're grateful it's true. The Thom Hartmann crew thanks you.
52 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. Jordan in Seattle, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Outstanding. Thank you, fellas. I'll make it quick because I know there's only so much time. But, Congressman, could you tell me what, if any, conversations taking place in the Progressive Caucus or Democrats about changing the longstanding policy of the Department of Justice to not continue to investigate, charge, or sentence a sitting president? And the rationale being that never before in the history of this nation have we had a convicted felon be elected.
Jordan, I think the bigger question of the Progressive Caucus is how do we ensure that the Justice Department isn't politicized, weaponized against the press, against Trump's political enemies. In terms of the Justice Department prosecuting Donald Trump or taking action, I think that's not going to be likely in this administration.
John in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, good afternoon, gentlemen. I just heard over the air that the 2 federal charges against Trump have been dropped, and so I thought that was newsworthy. And the other thing about Democrats, too, is about the Biden administration. Tammy Baldwin, I'm glad she won her race, but she wouldn't even be seen with President Biden. I think that's really rotten. And I think it's probably one of the biggest faults of the Democratic Party is they kind of shunned him. I think that was, I think they rue the day that they they dismissed him from running for president. I still think he would have won, believe it or not. But anyway, that's my comment for today. Thank you.
And Congressman, there is no law that says that you can't prosecute a sitting president. It was a policy that was written during the Nixon administration by John Mitchell's right-hand man, and then was reconfirmed by Bill Clinton's Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel when Clinton was being investigated. Those were both pretty damn self-serving times.
They are, and I think some future president can re-explore it. But the idea that anyone in the Trump administration is going to try to prosecute Donald Trump, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
To John's point, though, look, I was out there defending the president on the day he withdrew. I stuck loyal to him, as did Bernie Sanders, as did many progressives. I think if we didn't have a collective meltdown as a party after the debate and just said, look, he had been traveling for weeks overseas and it was a 9 p.m. debate, he didn't have a good night, maybe he could have recovered. But the party so turned on him that after that was almost impossible to recover. I do think the party needs to have a little bit more toughness in standing by our nominees and who we pick in the way Republicans do.
Yeah, there you go. Johan in Los Angeles, we have just about a minute here to the end of the show. Johan, you got a quick one, please?
Trump and his team tried to terminate the Constitution. Should the Democrats do the kind of something similar to change or rewrite the Constitution to keep up to date, or should we keep it the same? Your thoughts, please.
I think the question was on the Constitution. I mean, the Democrats certainly should be. Go ahead, Tom.
Trump says he's going to, rewrite it or ignore it or declare a state of emergency. Should Democrats do something like that preemptively?
Well, no, we should, before the Constitution, we could offer an amendment. The biggest amendment I would offer is to overturn Citizens United and to get the billionaires out of our democracy. I mean, that's what people are so upset about. You got Elon's billions, you've got Soros's billions, Bill Gates's billions. I mean, that's not how American democracy was supposed to be.
Yeah, there you go. Do you? We just have 30 seconds and not enough time for another call. Do you have any hope that something like that might happen? It seems to me like at the very least it's going to be on hold for 4 years.
Larry Lessig and I have an op-ed coming out in the Boston Globe talking about Maine, which regulated the contributions to super PACs could be constitutional under this Supreme Court. Yeah, we may not overturn Citizens United, but at least we can regulate the contributions people can make to super PACs, not more than $3,300 as opposed to millions.
At the state level.
At the state level.
Well,
I think that's
fascinating. That's fascinating. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always illuminating. I always appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. I'll be back with you tomorrow, same time, same place. Be good to yourself and the others around you, and I'll catch up with you tomorrow.
Been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.